Zach from Gravel Bike California, back here in Maxwell, ready for year 2 of the Grasshopper Series Huffmaster. Now, last year was my first time, but I had a lot of fun. It was a really fast course, but I'd like to do it better this time. I didn't pay attention and got dropped about a third of the way into the ride. My goal this time is to finish under 5 hours. Of course, it's never apples to apples out here, so I'm sure things will be thrown at me I'm not expecting. So, one pedal after the next. Let's roll. While the Grasshopper Adventure Series is the raciest I've been in, that even includes some of the best cyclists in the world, I'd label it as healthy competition, not cutthroat, wanting everyone to have their best day to push our limits. Even though I finished last year at 5 hours, 15 minutes and 31 seconds, my goal was to break the 5-hour mark, which I thought was feasible if I focused my strategy on the first 3/4 of the course. The first 40 miles would be critical to stay with the lead group, especially in the rollers in the latter half where I made my mistake last year. The biggest climb of the day followed, where I wanted to save my bullets but still stayed somewhere within the group. After skipping the first aid station, I was hopeful that I'd be catching on with a handful of others to the next peak 7 miles away. If I could stick to a pack, then the next dozen miles should be efficient if our formation could hold. The last 2 uphill efforts bookended Leesville, hoping to still have energy in the tank and a quicker pit stop than last year. With the last 20 miles trending down, I should know at this point what type of push I needed to meet my goal. Totaling 89.5 miles, I knew I'd have to average 18 miles per hour to hit my mark. Mig quaintly explained how he'd chase you into the afterlife if you crossed the center line, and rolling out, offering me encouragement.
GBC in the house!
All this year's start further in town meant I was already a minute down from last year, carrying a conversational pace that would hold true riding west on Maxwell Sites Road. Our first direction adjustment happened before the 2-mile mark, being a little check on staying in position, with the pace going up a notch, though still in the reasonable range, but I always wanted to stay within the front third of the pack in case of a mechanical potentially splitting up the group, and you can tell by this straight line that speeds were picking up, but I was more concerned when I was stuck freewheeling it. Not a coincidence that others would now be moving up the side, constantly weaving back and forth to stay in front. Our first moment of drama began after passing the sign right before the 8-mile mark, creating a sprint-like atmosphere storming into our first dirt sector that was more like mixed media at first, painfully aware of how the mud took a hacksaw to the peloton. Hard to see around everyone which line to take, and in some cases, it didn't matter. And while this first mud pocket was short-lived, the effects of splitting up the race wasn't, knowing I had to do everything I could to get back into the front group. Thankful for the turn on Glen Road, revealing I was a manageable 10 seconds from the front, able to catch on to the end pretty soon. But the next section was even more of a mosh pit, not realizing yet why I kept falling behind in mud, meaning once again I had to jump to it, taking the initiative to close this gap, and this next bend revealed how far away I was, more worried about the separation here than last year, because now divided into smaller age groups made it harder to collect back on the pavement, leaving me 20 seconds behind at the turn, definitely needing to burn matches to get into the next group, as was Tim going alongside, with his face showing how painful the last 4 miles had been for us, making the catch with the back of the group as they reached the front, giving myself a few moments to catch my breath. Now firmly back in the group, I didn't think I'd face the same type of pressure the next 10 miles to the highway taking the opportunity to count who's left, that at least half of our category was no longer with us, leaving total numbers in the low 20s, getting back to the approach of not getting stuck here in the rear, with our next dirt segment coming right before mile 18, starting this mile and 3/4 sector with the surface holding true like last year and not being as concerned trying to look around others, but that would change on the turn, where it wasn't mud but gravel potholes to avoid, meaning I gave up drafting for a better view, staying on the outside to see what's in front of me, with dozens of micro adjustments needing to be made, and maybe I lost position in the sector, but I did just enough to stay within the group. Once again, I didn't want to stay in the back, but I noticed part of the earlier wave was within our sights that for some reason facilitated a chase, bringing speeds up to the high 20s, at least catching them before the turn onto the highway, which potentially could have caused some problems. But the pack had thinned out by that point, enjoying the safety of the highway patrol, worried there might be another redistribution here at the start, but would cooler heads prevail? We had 5 miles on the highway, averaging just less than 1% of incline, though there might have been some concern over the rollers. Luckily, there wasn't as much chaos this go around, even making it to the front of the combined groups without much effort to get there, in good shape, being 4 minutes ahead of pace from last year. Turning onto county roads definitely put me on high alert, getting dropped last year 2 miles in. So I definitely wasn't going to pull out my third camera this time and be on high alert not to fall back in position during the rollers, remembering to just in case look behind me to make sure that I wasn't the last guy glad to be crossing the bridge with the pack, where last year started a 25-mile stretch solo. Staying with the group from this point on felt like playing with house money, with my hope to stick in there the next 11 miles. That trends barely upward for the duration, with one early pitch my only concern. Otherwise, the riding was quite cordial, feeling that others were well versed on what was ahead, knowing this was the place to cool down and even take a sip, even confident to start showing some panoramas, making sure not to forget the beauty of these quaint surroundings. Nearing the end of pavement, the pace did pick up a beat, although leaving enough in the tank for the main attraction, hitting the dirt, averaging 21 miles per hour so far. I made sure to not get caught up in the fury, tempted to try keeping up with the front, when my prediction that everyone would scatter about came into play, as this 2¼ mile climb stays remarkably close to its 7% average, meaning I was just going to find a comfortable tempo and stick to it no matter position shifting. Easier to focus because the bulk of your view is limited to just a couple hundred yards. Because when you catch sight of the peak a half mile away, you definitely can get jumping, seeing the end is near, while I was more distracted towards the top with the surroundings, and locking into the numbers on my GPS not helping either, somehow being almost 2 minutes up faster on this climb than last year, although feeling like I exerted myself less this go around. It was time for Newton's laws to go in effect, descending 2½ miles towards the first aid station, with the top both the steepest and most technical, possibly distracting from these snow-capped views. Feeling that my Terravel Rutland 38s were a good pairing for today's conditions, giving me a lot of confidence on sections like these without losing much on the flatlands. With the bottom becoming more pastoral far too fast for me, wanting more of that adrenaline rush that I'd get again later, glad to have a couple of riders in tow, but hoping to pick up a few more, being 12 minutes ahead of pace, skipping the stop, seeing if I could group up for the second half. Fortunately, my hope came through, finding a small pack just ramping up out of the aid station, looking to stick with the group at least for the next 7 miles, with a gradual incline averaging 2% over this length, not being the ideal spot for pacelining, but each of us shared in taking turns, with the profile being consistently inconsistent and the composition of the group picking up a rider here and there from other waves, though I had some theatrics in the middle of the sector, first losing my second bottle, leaving me just 22 ounces for the next 19 miles, then realizing I was losing a stroke or two in mud, probably from my suspension fork, once again staying hyper aware of sticking to this group. The traffic sign was a good reminder, forgetting that we were on an open road, aided by not seeing any vehicles out here. But I did have a sneaky feeling things were about to ramp up, with the last mile of dirt ticking up to 4%, not as a straight vector at first, but the grade did find a groove for the majority. Glad to be alongside Rich, another seasoned rider from Chico, knowing we had to hit the peak together with a little lip biting worth the effort. With a little lead in peaking Rail Canyon, everyone turned on the switch to rocket mode, kicking off 7.5 miles of pavement, much needed for the speed, now only 5 minutes ahead of pace, reaching 40 miles per hour, helping to rectify that, but the grade tapered back after a mile, allowing everyone to bunch together at the right slope where a pace line was effective, working quite well as a team at the start, but at the halfway point of the asphalt, the grade flattens out, and our group size kept fluctuating, picking up and losing riders from other waves, hurting the consistency taking turns in the pace line, with Rich taking another with him amidst this disruption. And I did my best to close the gap, but before another took a turn, it was too late. With these fractures continuing to be part of the narrative, again in front to close the gap on my own, able to catch the wheel, but at what cost? Though back to 12 minutes ahead of pace, nearly 2/3 done. With a little tease of dirt crossing Little Indian Creek, we were able to regroup after the slippery bridge, feeling like some urgency letting up, back to dirt with 7.5 miles to the aid station. Pretty happy with the results overall so far, starting to see others with signs of fatigue. And when our group subdivided again, there wasn't much risk reward here for me, though the opportunity to pick my head up to enjoy the surroundings, with the mood becoming far more social, with trains coming together to reform, and the temporary return of pavement right before coming into the compact establishment of Leesville, signaling the start of some climbing, though gladly interrupted by the aid station, working hard not to lollygag, keeping today's objective in mind. The climb carrying the event's namesake was just beyond, and while the sign may seem ominous, the effort itself is quite the opposite, clocking in about 2/3 of a mile, under 7%. Not categorized, but the last big push of the day. And when you start to think you may need to dial it back, then just like last year, I was surprised it was already over. But I was mostly ready for what was on the other side. But with that last stop baked in, only 2 minutes ahead of pace, my main concern was not losing time going horizontal, regretting again not bringing the helmet cam, because the view above the bars are outstanding, as you already have to be on high alert under normal circumstances. And even with it getting chippy at the bottom, glad it was hard to believe 5 miles ticked off so fast. Turning past the gate, there was still 6 miles left of Huffmaster, now flatter, but still elevationally advantageous for the duration, and while I could try catching a wheel, I was afraid of getting sucked into more watts than I can offer, now that I was 5 minutes ahead of pace, making sure to take the opportunity to look around, another year closer to being underwater to the future site's reservoir, hopefully with someone doing a better job than me, warning everyone to get out of the way in time, and while my legs were starting to feel spent, I somehow did this section a minute and a half faster than last year, approaching the enclave of sites, signaling the end of the segment, marking under 10 miles to go, turning into town where you should rent, not buy. The signs might not be providing real-time info. Going through the canyon where the future dam will be placed, not sure how much water will continue to flow, soon leaving me with a lot of open road. And while it would have been nice to have someone else to cut into the wind, didn't plan on having company today. Being pretty isolated second year in a row in both directions, coming up on some form of lantern rouge, saying goodbye to my final stretch of pavement, starting off with a little off-roading, thankfully the last piece of course tension in the last 5 miles, knowing this loneliness could continue until the end. And of course, when I assumed this would be the norm, this mirage of a train rolled up like that Coors Light commercial that I didn't have tickets for, but I jumped in and even gave a turn until I detached like that caboose a couple of miles back, just happy to keep some type of pace, knowing that unless I fell into a hole, that's the only thing from hitting today's target, crossing the line exactly 9 minutes ahead, not having much in the tank left, though the smiles should provide enough energy for that 1 mile left back to the start, especially with Mig replying to my request to be helicoptered back with the post party, taking over the town square and plenty of awards to be handed out. And while it was great to come away as one of the winners in the raffle, the best part today was getting to hang after everything shut down, because what is gravel without the people?
I mean, it's strange. You just burn so many bullets just to catch up to people to save energy. It was a lot of emptying the tank, and it eventually caught up at some point, but definitely that strategy paid off. I did a lot better, and yeah, I think next year the only thing I can improve is hiring a great nutritionist. Anyways, if you want to support us, go ahead, hit the subscribe button, go to our shop so we can bring you more. Oh, from the state of dirt, I'll get it.